Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 4th of October 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. You can email in mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, that's mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, with topics for future shows. The game in the background is Blacklight Retribution. It has been a little while since I played this game, and oh my god, does it show. Oh, I suck. That's what happens when you leave a game for a month, but whatever the case, the new Siege mode is really quite fantastic, and I'm enjoying that a great deal. First email comes in from Geilherm that says, the other day I was talking to a friend about the latest games and an interesting issue came up. Is being open world being used as an excuse from game developers to make less content and making pointlessly people back... that what? I'm going to assume you mean making people pointlessly backtrack, extending the playtime. Yeah, to some degree, it can be. I mean, there are various examples of games that use an open world system, and quite frankly, if you were to take the open world away and look very critically at the content it provides, you would find that it was quite weak. And one of those biggest examples in recent memory is probably Skyrim. Skyrim is an amazing world to explore, and that veneer gets in the way of suddenly realizing, hang on a second, there isn't actually an awful lot to this. I've talked in great detail about the lack of depth that Skyrim actually has. It is an ocean with the depth of a paddling pool. And the open world is what carries it, without question. It's got a great aesthetic. As regards to having a world to explore, it pretty much blows every other game out of the water. I can't think of any game that is better in that regard. You're always finding new dungeons and crazy things to get involved in. The problem is, of course, that they're all very, very similar to each other. But then again, can you really create a world as large as Skyrim and still keep the quest quality, the depth, the way that the world reacts to what you do, and the gameplay mechanics compared to a game that is much more linear than that? You can make complaints about the combat system within Skyrim, but then you've also got to think of it, hang on a second, this is still a big, big open world here. Is that actually limiting the combat system in any way? And you probably think, no, chances are it didn't. But if so much time was spent building this world, then the game is going to suffer in some other respect. Ideally, you'd want a game world as large, open, and detailed as Skyrim, with the combat system of something like Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, integrating the morality, choices, voice acting, and storytelling of a BioWare game, for instance. Can you mix all of those together? Well, in theory you can, but no company's managed to pull it off yet. And it's just because you're having to take on so many different massive projects within the overall game development process. Designing the world and creating something that large takes a huge amount of resources and time. Then throwing in the idea that you get, 100, 200 great voice actors, amazing scripts, multiple choices that affect the world. Just the whole thing compounds to make it ridiculously complicated. Now, I don't honestly believe that Bethesda went into Skyrim saying, we're going to make this big open world, we're deliberately not going to make it deep. I don't think that any developer really does that. I think that's a very cynical way of looking at things. I think that every dev really wants their game to be the best it possibly can be. But there are certain limitations to what you can do within a single studio, and I think Skyrim demonstrates that very aptly. When you build a world that's that huge, then you're gonna run into problems in other areas. When you build a world that's that detailed, you're gonna run into problems in other areas. And some might say, oh, well, Morrowind nailed it all. It's like, no, it didn't. The combat system in Morrowind was even worse than Oblivion and Skyrim. The world was far, far less detailed. There's really no question. And Skyrim continues to add to what the other games had. I mean, if you compare Skyrim to Oblivion, for instance, then you can look at a number of different things, including the way that conversations are handled. The conversation system in Oblivion was really silly. The fact that too many NPCs in Oblivion say the same damn thing. The supposed conversation system often doesn't make any sense. There is about 4 voice actors, I think, for the entire population of the game's NPCs. And don't even get me started on the Oblivion gates, one of the most dull and horrendous things I've ever seen. Dungeon design was way, way low. I actually heard that it was a single guy that designed all of the dungeons in Oblivion. I gotta give it to that guy, because that guy did a stellar job considering it was only him, but of course, compared to that, Skyrim's are much, much better. The combat system is arguably better in Skyrim as well. There are improvements across the board, but the game in question still has a lot of problems, and it's when you tackle something that large that you run into those issues. Now, has that actually been a game that's used an open world as an excuse? Well, I think we've had an awful lot of GTA-style drive-around, cause carnage games in recent years. I mean, since GTA 3 came out, I think that's definitely been a thing that many developers have attempted because it's a very popular emergent genre, but there haven't been all that many that have done it badly. Some were fairly mediocre, like Godfather the Game, Scarface The World Is Yours, if you remember that. I mean, they were still not terrible. Saints Row, the original, probably sucked, I would say, at least in comparison to the second and third one. And then you've got stuff like Red Dead Redemption, which was awesome. You've got Crackdown, which I loved. And then you've got a lot of other open-world, roamy, superhero-style games, is what I like to call it. Stuff like Prototype and the Spider-Man games. Of course, Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction, which is what I'd say a lot of those games were based on, and then Infamous, and a few other things, where you're able to just run around a city and do all sorts of stuff. But I think in those games, yes, a lot of the enjoyment comes from the fact that it is an open world, and while I love Prototype to death, I can say that the actual missions themselves aren't really all that interesting, and it's carried by the fact that you are able to fly around the map, chop people up, dive bomb, steal helicopters with tentacles, and do all sorts of crazy stuff. So I can definitely see where your friend's coming from there, but I would love to see some actual examples, because I don't think there are all that many. Most games that tackle open worlds are at least good in many other ways, even if they also have their flaws. This one comes in from Mr. Sight that says, when Ubisoft revealed that there would be a PC port of Assassin's Creed 3, they stated they will not support keyboard and mouse and will still demand the controller for playing it. It very much disturbs me as a PC gamer, because in order to play games on one platform, I'm forced to buy a controller from another, and I'm afraid of the possible future development for PC as a game platform. The quote from VG247.com goes, "We're definitely supporting the PC, we love PC, but I think it'll be PC with a controller. I don't see us investing hugely in a mouse and keyboard setup. I think if you want to play on PC and you want to play Assassin's Creed, then you have a controller. Is it actually valid to restrict the game to just one form of playing? I would like to hear your opinion on this." Well, they're not really restricting the game to one form of playing. I think that there are a couple of ways to interpret this. You could say, oh, well, you can't use keyboard and mouse with Assassin's Creed, which I don't think is true. I think what he means is we're not going to be putting a lot of extra time and effort into trying to make it work well with the actual keyboard and mouse. The thing is that, in my opinion, it worked fine anyway. I've played pretty much every Assassin's Creed game in some form or another on PC, and I've used keyboard and mouse, and I haven't really had a problem with it. I would say that arguably it's a bit better with controller, but there's a lot of game genres that are arguably a bit better with controller, and that's something PC gamers also have to accept. It very much comes down to whether or not the developer is deliberately hamstringing, or just not even trying to get it to work with the native controller on the system that they happen to be playing on. It's like if you made a Wii game and you didn't use the Wiimote nunchuck properly, then you could say that that's a bad port. It's the same as creating a game for 360 and PlayStation 3 and not have it work properly with the PC. To have it work properly with a PS3 versus a 360 is very easy because those controllers are nigh on identical. The only major differences with those controllers are the button placement, the right bumper right trigger, as well as left bumper left trigger, of course, compared to the 4 top buttons on the DualShock. The position of the analog sticks is slightly different, and the PS3 controller has a motion sensor within it. That's pretty much it, and as a result, it's very, very hard to screw that up. Both controllers are nigh on identical. But when you talk about a pad to a PC, well, things do get a little bit trickier. How do you do analog movement with a keyboard and mouse? Well, unless you directly control all movement with the mouse, which just doesn't work in action games, or indeed pretty much every game genre, then you're going to run into problems there, because keyboard is usually used for movement control, and yet that's entirely digital. It's on and off, and if you need precision, then doing it on a keyboard is just way, way worse than doing it with any kind of analog controller. And this can apply to a wide variety of different genres, including, of course, racing games, platformers, third-person action games, to some degree, flight simulators. It can be tricky, very tricky. I think, honestly, what we're probably going to get with Assassin's Creed 3 is a similar situation to what you had with all of the other Assassin's Creed games. One, the bloody thing's going to be late on PC, as it always is. Secondly, it's going to control reasonably well with the keyboard and mouse, but it will be better on a pad. And there are some game genres that will just be better on a pad. It is just no argument to that, until you have a fully analog keyboard solution, which I don't even see ever happening, because it's just such limited use. We'd have to see a massive explosion of PC gaming in order for developers to even consider something like that. Then we're going to be stuck with the idea that a pad is going to be a required purchase. I've said this many times before, and I continue to believe it. If you don't own a wired 360 pad, which is not a particularly expensive piece of hardware, then you're probably going to have a bad time as a PC gamer, because even on PC-specific games, there are still games which feel better with a controller. It's just really hard to escape. There are some genres which are just better on different peripherals. I don't ever see PC gamers complaining about needing a joystick to get the full experience out of a flight sim, so I'm really not 100% sure why they get all up in arms over the idea that they would need a pad to control certain games better. I think it's probably due to the fact that we've had such a nasty history of PC porting to the point where controls have just been now unusable. We've had horrible things like mouse acceleration, unrebindable keys, really horrible key layouts, the same key used for 5 different bloody actions, no hotkeys for switching between weapons. I think maybe it's because of that. It's kind of kick dog syndrome. We have been kicked so many times that we are naturally now suspicious of anything that says this will be better on a pad, and we immediately jump to the conclusion that it's a bad PC port. But there are still some games that I will pick up my 360 pad for, and I will use that happily, even if the game actually supports keyboard and mouse. And there are, of course, some other games that I wouldn't touch a pad with in a million years, which include third-person and first-person shooters. This one comes in from Daynar that says, recently Steam added software besides gaming. Game Maker was among the first to be added. I downloaded it and decided to mess around with it after discovering the Wanderlust Rebirth that was made using Game Maker. Within Game Maker, it allows you to play other games people have made through the Steam Workshop, although they technically haven't been released on Steam. It seems strange that these games can bypass green light, while many quality professionally made games can't. Although Game Maker is not the best game engine, do you think we might see quality completely free games come from Game Maker as a result of the publicity that comes with being on Steam? Or do you think it will comprise of mostly buggy junk? Also, do you think any great full games will come from this, or will Game Maker stay a very limiting game engine that is primarily used to make very similar to Flash games found all over the internet? Well, I think you just gave a good example. Wanderlust Rebirth was made using Game Maker, and that is a pretty cool co-op old-school RPG that you should very much look into when you get the chance. The original version of Desktop Dungeons was made using Game Maker. That's something to consider there, and that game is absolutely wonderful. Super Crate Box by Vlambeer is done using Game Maker. The original version of Dust Force was made using Game Maker. They made it again in their own engine prior to actually releasing it commercially, but it originally started on that. It's definitely possible to create good games using Game Maker, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating. It's also completely possible to release an inordinate amount of terrible using this. It is interesting that the Game Maker system allows you to completely bypass green light, although I have to say that as long as the games remain free, then I don't really see that being a problem. As you pointed out, they haven't technically been released on Steam. There is no Valve support involved in it. It's on the Steam Workshop, sure, but Valve's got nothing to do with it otherwise. They don't provide support for it, they don't have to deal with it going through their channels or anything along those lines, so I don't really find this to be too much of a problem. I think it could lead to some very interesting stuff and proof of concepts popping out which could result in the next big thing being created, and I don't really see a problem with it. I can understand the developers who are trying to fight their way through the greenlight process might find it somewhat annoying that these lesser games are finding their way onto Steam indirectly, but from a consumer standpoint, I definitely don't see any negatives to this. If you understand that when you load one of these games up, it's gonna probably suck, and it's most likely in an incomplete state, then, once again, what is the harm? There is something else I want to mention on this, the fact that they've started selling software to begin with. I don't know if I have a problem, I don't think I do have a problem with it, but I'll tell you what I do have an issue with, oh my, and that's the fact that this software appears on the new releases and there's no way to get rid of it. We had to bombard Steam and Valve with requests to get the show downloadable content button. For the longest time, it made browsing the new releases very, very difficult because we were just getting hit over and over and over again with downloadable content. I mean, if I click that right now, then I see a ton of DLC on the front page, and then you've got companies that release like 10 or 20 sets of unlocks at a time, and it just completely annihilates the new releases list, and it pushes new releases further down. It makes it harder to actually get exposure. When it comes down to software, that's the same thing. I mean, it's ridiculous. War of the Roses only came out yesterday, and it's almost been pushed off the front page, as has Cortex Command, because they've released 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of software onto the front page. You know what the stupid thing is? 2 of them are now identical. You've got 3D Mark Vantage and 3D Mark 11. I have no interest in being sold software through Steam, and I would imagine that a lot of people don't either, especially when some of this stuff is upwards of $80. 3D Coat costs $89. This is not the stuff that most people come to Steam for. There should be an option to get rid of it from the new releases list via a button press, just like show downloadable content. I know that it's an experiment for them. It's like, hey, we're doing software now, so we better actually let people see it, but I want it gone. Quite frankly, I really do. I don't want to have to see it. If you're going to sell it, that's fine, but I am not interested in it, so please don't waste my time with having that on the front page, and don't negatively affect other people's sales prospects because they lose their front page position all the quicker thanks to the addition of software into the list. Okay, folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Mailbox. I'll see you next time.